This is crazy. My husband threw me out of his home just because I asked to swap partners for a night.
This is crazy. I asked my husband to try partner swapping for a night. His response, divorce? I'm in a mess right now. My stupidity has caused me to lose my home. How silly of me to suggest to my husband that we should try partner swapping. What was I even thinking in the first place? I honestly don't know what came over me. I know I went out of line, but is that enough reason for my husband to want to divorce me? My husband decided to divorce me because I suggested we spice up our marriage a little bit. He destroyed my life, took everything from me, and even went as far as marrying my best friend. I never would have in a million years thought that my whole life would change on that fateful night. Everything happened so fast, it still feels like a dream. My husband married my best friend because I suggested we spice up our marriage and try partner swapping for just one night. It's outrageous, right? Wait till you hear my story. My name is Bella and I'm 27 years old. My husband's name is Chris. He is 30 years old and he is an engineer. Chris and I had a blissful marriage until I ruined everything with my mouth. That was the beginning of my nightmares. Everything changed the moment I suggested to Chris we should try partner swapping. It all happened so fast that it felt so surreal. It still feels like I'm dreaming. I never knew Chris and I would ever get divorced when we walked down the aisle 3 years ago. I thought it was a forever thing. Chris divorced me because I asked we swap partners for just a night. He ruined my life because of that single statement. He took everything from me and sent me away. According to him, I belong to the streets, and I'm not worthy of being called his wife. I blame myself for how things escalated quickly, and I take full responsibility for everything. But I still wish Chris reacted differently on that fateful day. So it all happened on our 3rd wedding anniversary. Chris and I went out on a dinner date to celebrate our anniversary. It was a surprise date, by the way. I was angry that day thinking Chris had forgotten our anniversary, but I didn't know he had a surprise for me. On the morning of our wedding anniversary, Chris acted normal. He didn't even wish me a happy anniversary, so I thought he had forgotten our wedding anniversary was today. I was so mad at him for forgetting about our anniversary. I didn't know he was just acting up and that he had arranged a huge surprise for me. I cried that morning as Chris West heading to work without wishing me a happy anniversary. Silly me, I thought he forgot. I was gloomy all through the day and even refused to pick his call when he called to check up on me, so he sent me a text instead and asked me to be ready by 6 that we are going on a business dinner. I wasn't happy. I couldn't believe he had forgotten about our anniversary, and now he wants me to accompany him to a business dinner. Chris sent his driver to come pick me up. We arrived at the venue, and to my greatest surprise, all our family and friends were there. It was a huge surprise. I saw holding a banquet with a smile on his face. He gave me the banquet and wished me a happy anniversary. He said he knew I was mad at him because I thought he had forgotten about our anniversary. He apologized for not wishing a happy anniversary earlier. We hugged and reaffirmed our love for each other. The dinner was an intimate one. It was just our immediate family and a few of our close friends. Chris told me he had another surprise for me, guys. I was shocked when he handed me a car key. I couldn't believe my eyes. I was happy I didn't know when I started crying and ruined my makeup. It was tears of joy, guys. Everything was going so well until Chris and I sat down to have a conversation. He said we should suggest ways we can spice up our marriage. I suggested we should try partner swapping with our friends for just a night. That was it, guys. That was how the beautiful night turned into a night I will forever regret. Chris asked me to explain what I meant by partner swapping. I should have stopped there, seeing how angry he was, but I didn't. I went further to explain. I told him we should pick one couple from our close friends, ask them if they're interested, and then we swapped partners. Chris lost it at that point. He flared up and started calling me all sorts of unpredictable names. All eyes were literally on us. I felt ashamed of myself that day. I wanted to disappear so bad because everyone was staring at us and whispering. He started shouting at me and calling me different sorts of names. He accused me of looking for ways to cheat on him. He called me a cheater and a liar. In a blink of an eye, everything escalated. He stood up and started throwing tantrums like a little baby that lost his candy. He went on to say he knew I never loved him, and how I have been looking for an opportunity to cheat on him. He even went on to say that he suspects I have been cheating on him with his friends. I felt embarrassed. All our friends and family that were present at the party ran to our table to inquire about the problem. Chris didn't say a word, he just walked out of the hall. He left me seated there like a fool. I couldn't even say a word. I was confused. I didn't know how everything escalated quickly. I was too stunned to speak. Everyone was lost. They kept asking what happened and why Chris was mad. I couldn't even utter a word. I was perplexed. One of Chris's friends offered to drop me off after seeing the state I was in. I was stranded, so I obliged. All through the drive, I kept trying to figure out what had happened. A night that was supposed to mark a new beginning ended abruptly on a sad note. I was so lost in thought that I didn't know when we arrived home. I got inside and met a drunken Chris. I was surprised because Chris hardly drinks. He asked who dropped me off, and I told him it was Joe, his friend. He got even more angry. He started accusing me of having an affair with Joe and some of his other friends. I asked him to calm down and that the alcohol is making him hallucinate, but he refused. He continued calling me names, and when I saw he wasn't going to stop anytime soon, I left him there and went upstairs. He followed me upstairs and continued ranting, so I had to lock myself inside the bathroom to avoid any altercations. The following day, I thought Chris would come and apologize for how he behaved the previous night, and we would settle everything, but I was wrong. I slept late because I had to make Chris already deep asleep before coming out of the bathroom. I woke up late, so I didn't know when Chris left for work. I decided to make everything right again, so I prepared his favorite meal for lunch. I took it to his office because I knew he would be hungry as he didn't have breakfast before leaving for work. I wish I never went to his office that day. So I went to Chris's office with the lunch I prepared, hoping we could sort out our issues, but I was embarrassed instead. Chris sent me out of his office and warned me never to set my foot in his working place ever again. I felt embarrassed. People were watching. I didn't know Chris was this heartless. I never knew a day would come when Chris would look at me with so much hate in his eyes. I left the office with my head bowed in shame. Everyone looked at me with pity. I left the office for home and cried myself to sleep. I kept wishing I never made that suggestion. I regretted going for our anniversary dinner. I regretted everything. That was how my husband turned to a complete stranger. Later in the day, I was woken up by the sound of Chris's car. Then the unexpected happened. Chris and our lawyer walked in. My heart skipped when I saw them together. I was served divorce papers. I couldn't believe my eyes. How can Chris divorce me for such a trivial thing? I was even serious, to be honest. It was just an innocent suggestion. If I had known things would turn out this way, I would have come up with the idea in the first place. I was so devastated. I begged him for a second chance, but he refused to listen. All my pleas went on deaf ears. I refused to sign the divorce papers. I couldn't sign the divorce papers. I couldn't imagine my life without Chris. He is my best, the absolute love of my life. The thoughts of losing him made my heart skip. I tore the papers. I reminded Chris of the vow we took 3 years ago. He vowed to deal with me. He said all manner of things to me, but I didn't take any of that to heart. We had a heated argument that day, and he vowed to deal with me mercilessly. I thought it was just an empty threat, but I was wrong. Chris started throwing my things out, one after the other, from clothes to shoes. He threw everything out and asked me to leave his house. I was angry with him, but I couldn't bring myself to leave. I mean, how can I leave my matrimonial home just because of a little misunderstanding? I ignored Chris and continued with the rest of my day. Chris made the house a living hell for me. He was frustrated with every move. He made the house a living hell for me. He would come back every night drunk and make a scene. With time, his attitude would change, but it got even worse. Chris started bringing in different ladies every night, most of which were his colleagues. I got irritated by his attitude. How could he stop so low to that level? I got tired of his daily shenanigans. I decided to stay in a hotel for a few days so I could clear my head. I thought a little space would bring peace to our troubles, so I decided to give him space so he could reflect on his actions. But to my greatest surprise, Chris became more arrogant and stoned-hearted. He called me one day. I thought he had finally come back to his senses and wanted me back home. He asked for my whereabouts, and I told him. He came there and made a scene. He asked me to return the keys of the car he bought for me as a gift. He forcefully took the car keys from my hands and left. I couldn't believe my eyes. How could Chris be so unreasonable? At that moment, it dawned on me that Chris had made up his mind, and he would do everything to frustrate me to give in to his biddings. I called his parents to at least explain everything that was happening to them, but to my greatest surprise, Chris had fed them with lies about me. They told me they were aware of everything, how I slept around with Chris' friends and squandered his money. I was shocked to hear that. Everything Chris told them were lies. Worst of all was that they were not even ready to hear my own side of the story. I knew it was pointless proving anything to them because Chris had brainwashed them and they blindly believed him. They accused me of ruining their son's life and ended the call on me. I got tired of everything. I couldn't keep up anymore. But I decided to just try my luck one more time. I went to the house to see Chris. Maybe this time we would be able to have a conversation. We haven't sat down to have any conversation ever since that fateful night. I got to the house and got the biggest shock of my life. I saw Chris in bed with my best friend, Julia. It took all the strength in me for me not to faint that day. I was literally shaking. I tried, but I couldn't hold my tears. I asked Chris why he decided to hurt this much. He opened his stupid mouth to tell me I caused everything. He told me I was the one that suggested partner swapping and that he was just experimenting and doing what I said. He told me he was only following my command and that after giving it a lot of thought, he realized I was right and partner swapping is the best way to spice up our marriage. I couldn't take it anymore. Julia just sat there quietly watching the drama unfold. I felt betrayed by my husband and best friend. What hurts me the most is that I have been discussing my marriage crisis with Julia ever since this issue began. Julia is my childhood friend. I couldn't believe she would ever do something like this to me. I couldn't even confront Julia. She was just like a sister to me. How could she betray me like this? Didn't she know how much I loved Chris? The painful thing was the unremorseful look on her face. She didn't look like someone that repented what she had just done. She looked bothered and unconcerned. I stormed out of the room angrily. At that point, I already made up my mind to give Chris the divorce he wanted. I was shattered and lost. I almost went insane. I wasn't serious about the partner swapping crap. It was just a joke and mere suggestion. I don't know why Chris decided to take it seriously. I signed the divorce papers and a few months later, Chris and I got divorced. Chris made sure I didn't get a penny. We signed a prenup before our wedding, so I didn't get a damn. He took everything from me. The house we bought together was in his name. He claimed ownership of the house and took it. Julia moved into the house with him and they started staying together. Later, he sold off the house. He didn't even need my permission or signature to do that because the house was in his name and he was in possession of all the house documents. Every investment we did together was in his name. I thought we would forever be together. I didn't know a day would come when we went our separate ways. If I could go back in time, I would have done things differently. Chris took all of our investment. He claimed everything. He didn't even leave one thing for me. He also took the cars he bought for me and sold them. Chris went as far as spending all the money we saved together. We always save a certain amount of money every month for our unborn kid's future. Chris was the signatory to the account because everyone knew I was a big spender. I spend my money on shoes and bags a lot, so we kept everything in Chris's account. Chris pulled everything out. When I asked him about the money, he told me there was no money and that he had spent every single token of the money. I couldn't even believe my ears. I think that was Chris's way of punishing me. He wants me to be stranded and alone. He claimed he spent the money on hiring lawyers for our divorce. Funny, right? Yes. I laughed when spilled the rubbish too. I laughed so much that it turned to cry. I didn't even know when I started crying. I don't know if I was crying for a divorcee or the fact that my savings and investments are all gone. I didn't want to drag anything with him. I was determined to survive at all costs. The divorce proceedings were mentally exhausting. It was even more exhausting seeing Julia accompanying Chris to the court during every hearing. Julia would always come to me after each hearing about how Chris was a good man to him. She was doing everything possible to get me to talk to her, but I refused. They were always trying to get my attention with their unnecessary PDA. The sight alone disgusted me. It was after the divorce that I knew why Chris flared up the way he did. His childhood friend told me everything. He told me how Chris had once lost his first love to partner swapping. His childhood love left him after sleeping with another person. The partner swapping went wrong and his manly ego was broken. So in a way, I awoken a childhood trauma in him. I guessed he was scared of losing me too. That's why he acted the way he did. He literally blew everything out of proportion. But deep down, I know that wasn't the reason. If he ever wanted me in his life, he would have done things differently. But that wasn't a reason for him to divorce me and do what he did to me. He practically ruined my life. But after hearing of how he lost his first love, I felt sorry for him. But I still can't forgive him for everything he has done to me. The more I write about this, the angrier I become. I met Chris 5 years ago when he had nothing. I stuck with him because of my love for him. I helped him put his life together. When I met Chris, he owned a huge student loan and squatted with his friends. Everyone advised me to leave him alone, including my friend Julia, but I refused and stayed with him. How could he pay back my love and affection for him all these years with betrayal? It was obvious that I loved Chris more than he loved me. Everyone knew except me. I helped Chris clear out his student loans from the little money I earned. I guess I was blinded by love. I can't believe the same person I changed his life to a few years ago didn't hesitate to divorce me. It feels like a movie I know, but it isn't. I wish I listened to people that advised me against him. Now he has practically ruined my life because of a single suggestion I made. Chris and Julia went around spreading false rumors about me, that I slept with his friends while he was away on a business trip. The news spread like wildfire, and soon people started gossiping about how unfaithful I was to my husband. It was only a few of our friends that cared to reach out to me to find out what really happened. 3 months after our divorce, Chris and Julia got married. The wedding was talk of the town. Apparently, Chris lavished all the money we saved together on the wedding. He bought a new house, and they moved in together to start a new life. I, on the other hand, became a shadow of myself. I didn't know where to start from or how to start. I didn't have a husband to lean on or a friend to confide in. Life didn't make sense to me anymore. The life I knew was taken away from me. I became mentally exhausted, so I became depressed. It felt like my life had ended. It was after the divorce that everything really dawned on me. The people I have built my life around for the past 5 years were no longer around. I felt alone, betrayed, and wounded. The more I decide to forget everything, the harder it becomes. Everything got so bad that I almost lost my job. It was at that point, the log on my face cleared. I decided to pick myself up and start all over again. I started attending therapy sessions. I didn't want to go to therapy in the first place, but I'm glad I did. That was one of the best decisions I have ever made. I started learning to let go of the good and bad memories I had with Chris. I learned how to forgive someone without the person asking not for their sake, but for my sake. Update. Hi guys, it's me again. I'm glad I took the bold step. I just had to go to therapy. I regained my confidence and started building my life all over again. I'm finally learning to smile again. I moved in with my sister because I became homeless after the divorce and I was penniless. You guys remembered Joe, right? Chris' friend that dropped me home after Chris left me that night at our anniversary dinner. Yes, Joe. He was a great support system all through my dark moments. He was always there for me. He became my backbone. He helped me snap out of depression fast. He was the one that registered me for the therapy session. He became a friend I could confide in. He listened to my vents without saying a word. There was an attraction between us, but I kept the friendship platonic. I didn't want a situation where Chris's accusations would turn out to be true. So I tried all my best to keep our relationship simple. Joe wasn't happy with my decision. According to him, I should move on and stop waiting for Chris. He told me dating him would be a way of getting back Chris for marrying my best friend Julia. But I gave it a second thought and declined. He got angry and left. I wanted to beg him to stay because I was alone and needed someone around. But I have learned from the past never to beg anyone to stay when they want to leave. Experience, they said, is the best teacher. I moved on with my life like nothing happened. As for Chris and Julia, they're still married and living happily together. They are even expecting a child together. I wish them nothing but the best. What is still a mystery to me today is how Julia and Chris got together. I think I would never know how it happened. That is one puzzle I'm still unable to solve till today. It still feels surreal that my best friend is married to ex-husband. Everything still feels like a dream. I can't believe Julia is married to the same man she advised me to leave 5 years ago. It's unbelievable. To be honest, they both hurt me, but I have decided to forgive them for my own sanity. I can't continue to hold grudges against people that betrayed me without considering my feelings. But one thing is certain. They never cared about me the way I cared about them. That is my story, guys. I hope we all learn from my story. Think before you talk, don't run your mouth out of excitement. Before you talk, try and filter some things. Most importantly, not all friends should be trusted. Some should just be avoided by all means possible. One last thing, don't love a man more than he loves you. The love should be on an equal level. Thanks and goodbye.
I hid my marriage from my affair. I'm even saying it wrong because shouldn't I be hiding my affair from my marriage? Yeah, I guess that's what you all are thinking. But trust me, I hid my marriage from my affair. I had an affair as I was married, and my affair found out and confronted my husband, which in turn ruined my marriage. How sick must I have been to have an affair while being married? Well, I can assure you I was perfectly fine. I never wanted to marry in the first place. I had been forced into the marriage. Meanwhile, I had still been madly in love with the man I was having an affair with, and not the one I was supposed to be married to. Even when I had married my husband, there had been no transfer of feelings. I never loved my husband. I don't think I would have ever loved him. I would have simply stuck to living in a loveless marriage as long as I was peacefully having my affair. But my affair found out I was married by a slip, and now I didn't have any of the both men in my life. This was all because of a stupid mistake. Before you all come on here to judge me, I was in love. My affair was the one I had planned on getting married to, but then my parents decided to have an upper hand on who I spend the rest of my life with, so they got me married to my husband as at then. I didn't love the man, I had someone that I loved, and I didn't want to let it slip out of my hands. So I continued to see the love of my life while I had married my husband at my parents' request. And the relationship with the love of my life became an affair. My life was absolutely perfect. Nobody knew of my shenanigans, and I was extremely careful, but then I was found out even with all my carefulness. I had been married to my husband for 2 years before everything began crumbling down. Like I had said earlier, I had gotten married to my husband because of my parents and how they had forced me to get married to him. He was a means to an end for my family. I mean, if they had left me, I would have stayed unmarried until my affair decided to propose to me. But according to my mother, I was getting too old to be a spinster and talk was being raised in the church. Yes, my parents were overly religious and high-standing members of the Christian church. They ruined my life because they didn't want tongues wagging in the church. Well, I had been the one to ruin my life, but they had started the chain of events. Time for a little backstory to get you to understand. My name is Sarah, and I'm 27 years old. My husband's name is Nick, and he's 30 years old. My husband had been the eligible bachelor at my church, and my parents had through him quite the snatch. He was rich, good-looking, religious, and was a doctor. All the things that ticked a parent's good book. Ugh! I had hated my husband at first because he was about to come in between me and the man I only had eyes for. I had no plans of even getting married to him, honestly. I was going to stand my ground and tell my parents that I already had someone I already had in mind to marry. In fact, that had been what I had done. Then I had reality handed back to me with my mother's shouts of retaliation if I refused to get married to who they wanted me to marry. I know some of y'all will be shocked at the prospect of arranged marriage still being a thing. Well, it was when it was my turn to get married, even upon my cries, that I had someone I wanted to marry, someone I loved. That just seemed to provoke my dad all the more, and if there was one thing my dad was, it was strict and thorough. Okay, that's 2 things, but you get my gist. He went and dug out everything on the man I wanted, and it turned out there was something suspicious on the man I wanted. So with much persuasion, I got married to my husband, the one my parents wanted and had been in support of, the doctor and the rich guy. On the day of my wedding, I didn't tell the guy I was in love with that I was getting married. He wasn't a religious person, and my wedding was a formal religious ceremony with a small reception at my home later, but that was it. So there was no way he could have known, and that's how I had married my husband. Yeah, everything was peaceful after my marriage. I didn't forget about my lover. We just went out of communication until one fateful run-in. I was doing a late evening shopping, and we bumped into each other at the grocery store, and I fell for temptation. That's how I began having an affair with my former lover while being married to my husband of 2 years. I'm not putting this piece out here to be judged. I had a chance to be with the person I loved and please the people that brought me into this world, and I took it. It was perfect. He didn't know I was married, of course, which made it all the more perfect. He would have never taken me back if he knew I had been married from the start. But he didn't know. I went to see him on the days my husband had back-to-back calls in the hospital, which was almost every day, so there was no way I could have been caught by my husband. In all fairness, I didn't think my husband truly loved me. He cared for me and provided for me, but he hadn't loved me, now that I think of it. He had been in love with that darn hospital, so forgive me for going somewhere else to seek love and comfort. I mean, there was a time when my husband didn't ask if I was okay or even alive when he had stayed at the hospital for a full week on call. Sure, I had already started my affair with my lover, but that strengthened my resolve to stay in the affair even more. It was like I was just a property he had acquired and he couldn't be bothered to check up on me or anything. I had complained to my parents, my mom especially, but she had seen me as whiny. According to her, my husband was doing real work to be able to provide for the family we would have. Yeah, well, while he was doing his work, I was being worked on. I don't apologize for it. But hiding everything came at a great cost. Like I had mentioned earlier, my life had been perfect. An unaware husband and a hot lover, both which didn't know of each other, and I was making it work. Yeah, my fantasy didn't last very long before I was caught by my lover. He had paid close attention to certain signs which led to me being caught and humiliated like a thief. I hadn't committed any crime. Stringing two men along hasn't and will never be a crime. But I was treated like I had committed a crime. I was just after my own happiness, since I never got it in the first place. I didn't have it after everything. While going to see my lover, I had always been careful. I made sure to get rid of every sign of marital life that could give me away. I always left my ring at home, hid my husband's texts, and even went so far as creating another homepage on my phone that didn't show pictures of my married life. Luckily, I had few friends, so there was no one to be a tattletale to my lover or my husband. My marriage life had been a secret airtight vault from my lover, and my affair had been a secret airtight vault from my husband and family. There was no slipping from me, so I had thought. Things began warping up together when my husband got an extended leave from the hospital and started spending time at home. It was like his senses switched and he realized he had a wife at home and began behaving like a cat in the heat of mating season. It was irking, because he had no right to abandon me and start behaving like I was the only source of water left in the world. Can you imagine how confused and irritated that left me? I was finally getting back my happiness after being forced to marry him and taking the back seat between him and his relationship with the hospital, and it was then he decided to act like I exist. I hadn't liked it one bit. Anyway, he began acting all loving and affectionate, wanting to take me on trips, shopping. Basically, he wanted to accompany me anywhere I went. That put a dent on my relationship with my lover, as I couldn't get to see him more often. The first week I'd had to lie that I was on a trip, but the coming weeks with my husband still on leave, my lover began to get more demanding. Sometimes in the middle of the night, he would call me on FaceTime to know where I was and what I was up to, with my husband right there in the room with me. Everything started to become suffocating as I couldn't focus properly and juggle the two. It ultimately became hard and I slipped. Yep, I slipped, and that's how I was caught by my affair. The calls from my lover became too much, so I decided to risk it and go see him. Most wrong decision of my life. I forgot to change my phone settings to the created homepage that hid my husband's text and his pictures from the prying eye, and that night while I was in bed with my lover, I got a text from my husband asking if I got to my mom's place safely. It was total mayhem from that point onward. My phone pinged, and my lover picked it from the dresser and saw my husband's profile photo, which was a picture of us from our wedding, and he went livid after he read the text. He smashed my phone on the wall and called me all sorts of names before demanding I leave his house. This had been in the early hours of the morning. So imagine me with clothes from the previous day and my coat wrapped around my body, standing on an empty street, hoping and praying for a taxi, even though I wasn't religious and couldn't go to my parents' place as they were out on a trip. All because I chose to have an affair with someone who I had loved dearly before my parents ruined my relationship with him. Then he found out I was married and decided to invoke mayhem for lying to him and leading him on. If you had been in my shoes, what would you have done? Well, at that point, I was at a total loss for words. I ended up getting an Uber back to my house and waiting till about 6 in the morning before sneaking into the house. The sneaking didn't do much good because I was caught by my husband and had to explain why I had left my parents' house early. I had pulled a good lie, but I had known nothing was going to save me from what was coming. This was the point where I probably should have confessed, but I hadn't. Everything seemed quiet after the night my lover threw me out of his house once he found out I was married. It was too quiet, but I wasn't complaining. My life went back to normal. Well, it went back to the way it was before the start of my whole affair. Because I don't think my life had ever been normal since I married my husband. My husband resumed work, and I was back to being the forgotten and neglected property wife. Would you call me stupid if I said I missed my affair? Yeah, I was stupid because instead of letting the sleeping dog lie, I sought it out. Yes, I went back to my lover and lied about everything. Once again, I was stupid, but I was desperate for that slight feeling of happiness. When I say I had lied about everything, I lied about the picture and how my husband was my best friend, and the picture was from a photo shoot we did together for one of my mom's friend's wedding boutique to announce her new collection. He believed it, or so I thought once again. I didn't know he agreed, so he could gather evidence of me cheating. I was stupid, a total mass of stupidity, that's what I was. I had dug myself an even bigger grave in the mistake I had made. I started sneaking off to see my lover, not knowing every time I was with him, I was helping him gather evidence of my unfaithfulness. I found out the hard way on another fateful evening when I was preparing to go home after spending the entire day at his place. He had a pile of pictures of us together placed on his table like he wanted me to see it. And when I had asked him what he was planning to do with the pictures, that's when I got to know I was sharing my bed with a monster. In explicit terms, he told me to publicly divorce my husband, or he was going to make everything public and not in a gentle way. To say I got scared was the least understating term I could think of, so I ran from him. I ran with the pictures, of course. I didn't know what I had planned to achieve at that point in time, but I was hoping those were the only copies he had of our affair together. And if I was with them, he didn't have anything to blackmail me. Feel free to call me stupid with any word you can think of. How did I think running away with the evidence would make the fact that I had an affair go away? It didn't in any way. As before, the first week was quiet. No sign of my threatening lover anywhere. The second week was when chaos struck. And it struck in church. Yes, with my mom and my dad present, my ex-lover walked up to the podium to testify about me and his life. You would think this stuff was one for the books, but I witnessed it live. He didn't outrightly say my name, but I knew he was threatening me. It was as plain as day. He threatened to expose my cheating self in front of everyone in the church. My parents would have had a fit if he had succeeded, but I took my lesson and counted my blessings. I'm sure this is where you guys would probably be expecting me to say I ran straight to my husband and confessed my stupid deeds. I didn't. More like I couldn't. My husband chose that week to sleep over at the hospital. I couldn't walk into his workplace and be like, "Oh, I had an affair outside our marriage." That would have been a big mistake. But it turned out, waiting was an even bigger mistake, because by the time my husband came back from his week-long shift, pictures of my cheating had been plastered all over our house. My affair decided to pay my husband a visit with evidence, but when he didn't find my husband at home, he decided to put up the pictures all over our front porch. He hadn't been joking when he had said he would make me regret it, and it was at that moment that it dawned on me that I had ruined my marriage. The way my husband looked at me like I had killed his whole hopes and dreams still has me traumatized. After he came home and found the pictures, he threw me out of the house and cut off all contact with me. My parents had been asking me what went wrong, and since he hadn't told them, I decided not to either. Do you guys think I should have told him when I had the chance? Do you guys think my husband would have listened to me at that point if I had confessed to him? Update 2. Hi Redditors, I'm back with an update after cheating on my husband with my longtime lover. After being thrown out of my husband's house, I went to my parents' place to stay and lied to them that my husband was working week-long shift at the hospital, so I thought I would stay with them instead of staying in an empty house. They bought my lie and in turn bought me time before the whole reality of divorce and everything settled in. It didn't last long though. I was thrown into reality within a month by the presence of divorce papers in my mail. Of course, by the time the divorce papers came along, my parents had already gotten the feeling that something was up. My dad was anything but a stupid man, unlike his daughter. Anyway, the day the divorce papers showed, my parents sniffed it out and I got the parental scolding. Imagine scolding a fully grown adult. LOL. They didn't give 2 cents to the fact that I was grown, and I probably didn't want the marriage in the first place, that's why it didn't work out. To my parents, it was how their image would look in the church when word of my divorce comes out. So they threw the papers in the trash and called my husband. I started going to therapy with my husband. Yes, as a result of my parents cajoling, my husband decided he could be in my presence again. No one gave a thought to what I wanted. However, I agreed to the couple's therapy so I could talk to my husband, or not ex-husband, because I was still going to sign the divorce papers from the look of his face. I wanted to sign them. Sure, I had said previously that I had ruined my marriage. I didn't want it to end that way, with my husband seeing me as a cheat, even though I was. I wanted the end of our marriage to be peaceful. That's why I had agreed to the therapy. It helped a lot. We talked about how the marriage was rushed on us, and we truly didn't have any time to develop our feelings. We talked a whole lot, and there had been no shouting through the sessions. It was as peaceful and helpful as ever. I began seeing my husband in a new light. I signed the divorce papers a month after therapy, finally having the courage to face my parents and tell them the marriage wasn't going to work out, at least at the time. Safe enough to say, my husband and I became friends and just hung out whenever we could. It was all wholesome, and I thought my life was finally going to have semblance of peace, but I was wrong. In fact, I'm always wrong when it came down to these kind of things. You know, things like thinking my life was back on track or all was right in my world. My ex-lover, the affair that has ended my marriage, decided he wasn't done with me yet. He showed up to my house. Yep, knocked right at the front door with my parents around and introduced himself as my lover. Up till that moment, I had never truly told my parents what had happened to make me and my ex-husband split up. They had thought we just agreed to go our separate ways because of indifferences. They didn't know it was because I'd had an extramarital affair. They found out that evening, and my dad brought out his shotgun for the first time since I could remember, ready to blast off my ex-lover's head. Luckily, my mom convinced him to put it away. And do you want to know what popped out of my ex-lover's mouth next? A marriage proposal. Like the hooligan actually thought he would pop by my parents' house with a marriage proposal, and I would be so inclined to say yes, that my parents would be so inclined to bless the marriage. Can you comprehend the audacity of the man? How had I been in love with him before and ruin a perfect marriage? It was then I realized I had been foolish to get with him, all because of a little sliver of happiness. I had been totally foolish. He continued yapping that he had done away with all the pictures, and he hadn't known what came over him to do that, but he was truly sorry, and that he loved me enough to want to marry me. According to him, he just got so jealous and livid that I had gotten married, and I had hidden it from him. That was what had made him react the way he did. He said he had dreamt of marrying me since we had been together before my marriage, and seeing me already married but not to him threw him off guard. All of that just sounded like a well-thought-up script to my ears. After he was done talking to himself, because it definitely wasn't me he was talking to, he was shoved out the door with a shotgun to his back, and my father promised him a bullet in his skull if he was ever seen around me. I never saw him again, luckily, and my life went back to normal, at least for me. However, knowing as how people were people, talks and speculations about my marriage started coming up, and the gossip was enough to drive me mad. So I left. Yes, I left my parents' church, left Hood River, Oregon to Seattle, Washington, because I was after my happiness and maybe one day a true unconditional love. Hello, Reddit users. I hope you guys learned a thing or two from my negative experience. Never let anyone dictate your life for you, especially as an adult, from your friend to your parents. I couldn't say no to my parents, and I ended up ruining what was someone's idea of perfect. Also, never fall for an illusion of happiness. We all deserve to be happy, but we deserve to be happy the right way. My experience taught me a lot, and honestly, I'm doing better now. I really hope you guys learn from me too, and not see me completely as the villain. Sure, I was a bad person to my husband, but I had thought I was doing it for me, and I learned the hard way. Lastly, do not fall for an illusion of love. If it's right, we all will know. I'm still trying to find that right feeling in my life. If I find it, I'll definitely give you all an update as to what true love is like. Until then, stay happy, fellas.